Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it's made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, Kavanaugh is confirmed. Although it seems like an eternity, what began in July, I believe July 16th was the date of the nomination, ended on October 6th. This was less than 90 days, everybody. That's all I can tell you. It was less than 90 days. ABC News actually gave coverage of the confirmation vote on Saturday, and this was the report they filed. It was very brief and almost objective.
Afternoon. I'm Jonathan Carl, and we're coming on the air with breaking news. The Senate just moments ago voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court, completing a polarizing chapter in American history and cementing a conservative shift for the nation's high court for a generation. The vote, 50-48, is the narrowest margin for a Supreme Court confirmation in more than 130 years. The nomination process bitterly divided the Senate, the confirmation thrown into a tailspin by allegations of sexual assault dating back decades. Hundreds of protesters are gathered outside of the Capitol and the Supreme Court. And make no mistake, this confirmation marks a huge victory for President Trump. Let's get right to ABC's senior congressional correspondent, Mary Bruce on Capitol Hill. Mary?
John, this ultimately came down to 4 key swing votes and a decision that they've described as agonizing. 3 of those senators, Jeff Flake, Susan Collins, and Joe Manchin, voting to support Judge Kavanaugh. Joe Manchin, the only Democrat to side with Republicans, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, the only Republican to cross party lines. John, I've talked with members on both sides of the aisle here who say this fight was so brutal, it marks a new low in the partisan divide.
Well, as I said, it was almost objective. Let's be clear about it. The partisan divide in the U.S. Senate did not begin with Kavanaugh. As a matter of fact, there are some who would say that it did not necessarily begin with the previous administration or going back. The partisan divide in the U.S. Senate goes back to before Reconstruction. I mean, let's not act as though the Senate has ever been anything other than a partisan body since you put in the 17th Amendment. For those who do not know what the 17th Amendment is, that is the amendment that called for the direct election rather than the appointment by state legislatures of U.S. senators. So I got to retract my prior statement. Prior to Reconstruction, senators were not elected, they were appointed. At that time, you didn't get the 17th Amendment until the early 20th century. But to say that since you allowed elections to get into the Senate, that it has not been a partisan body is ludicrous. It's always been partisan. So this is not, and this is a new low. No, there's always lows and highs with partisanship. It'll always be that way. It always has been that way. You don't worry about it. You just deal with it. But let's talk about this. Let's be honest about what this was not about. This was not about Merrick Garland. That was thrown around. You guys didn't treat Merrick Garland this way. You didn't get. Nobody mistreated Merrick Garland. Well, you didn't give him an interview. We didn't mistreat him. We just didn't talk to him. We didn't call him up to Capitol Hill and then wait for somebody to bring up some charges against him and then try to ruin his life. We didn't do that. He was treated respectfully. The issue there was a GOP Senate decided within their right not to allow a president with whom they profoundly disagreed to nominate a third Supreme Court justice. They're within their right. Now, I guess you would have felt better had they brought him up for a vote and then voted him down on party lines. Well, first of all, that was not necessarily likely to happen. And second of all, what difference does it make? Merrick Garland is not an issue. By the way, Brett Kavanaugh and Merrick Garland, on cases where you can compare, they agree more than 90% of the time. So if you like Merrick Garland, you should like Brett Kavanaugh. Let me tell you what else this was not about. This was not about Trump. Got to remember, Trump just did his job. Hey, I went out and found somebody who is nominated. Who is qualified. I nominated that person. I can verify his qualifications. Matter of fact, he's been sitting on the second most important court in the country for the past 12 years and has served with distinction. The American Bar Association, to the extent that matters, gave him their highest rating as being, among the most qualified jurists in America to sit on the Supreme Court for, those who aren't there. He did his job. And then when the going got tough, he did something that most presidents don't do. He didn't blink. I nominated a guy that I think is the right guy, and you're going to give him a vote. That's it. Donald Trump did not do anything until very late in the process where he actually took on the accuser of Merrick Garland about her allegations, which were unsubstantiated, uncorroborated, and to some extent refuted. This was about the Senate. This was about the Senate. Where they're going to have loyalty to party, or loyalty to their base, or loyalty to the rule of law. Could they be intimidated? Which reminds me, NBC actually recorded this during the Kavanaugh confirmation vote to give you an idea of the pressure that people were trying to bring against senators even as they were voting.
President Trump did watch from his Air Force One cabin, surrounded by reporters, as Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed. The president has now put his imprint on the Supreme Court with 2 conservative justices. He will take a victory lap tonight at a rally in Kansas after what he called a horrible attack by Democrats on his new justice.
On this day to tally the final votes, thousands marched on the U.S. Capitol demanding to be counted. Scores arrested after charging the Capitol steps, trying to wield last-minute influence against the odds.
It's never over until the votes are counted.
This fight is not over. This is one battle, but we are going to keep going.
The free speech on display also came from those who believe Brett Kavanaugh is the right choice.
I've just had it, and I just feel like I need to support my president, Judge Kavanaugh, and my country.
Many Many stood up for sexual assault victims and against Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who fought back against decades-old sexual misconduct allegations.
This is not okay with American women.
Others said they believed Kavanaugh's denials over Christine Blasey Ford's accusation.
There's no evidence to corroborate her claims, and you're going to ruin his life. Is that fair?
A rare comment from the First Lady, ending her Africa tour in Egypt.
Judge Kavanaugh, I think he's highly qualified for the Supreme Court. I'm glad that Dr. Ford was heard.
At the White House, President Trump left for a campaign trip.
I think he's going to make us all very proud. I also feel very strongly that in the end, maybe the process, it was really unattractive, but the extra week was something that I think was really good.
Inside the Senate chamber, Democrats argued their next step must be action on Election Day.
There is one answer: vote.
While Republicans embraced their narrow victory.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh is among the very best our nation has to offer. He will make the Senate and the country proud.
With the vice president presiding, protesters tried to interrupt the actual vote.
The sergeant at arms will restore order in the gallery.
But the narrow margin was enough.
On this vote, the ayes are 50, the nays are 48. The nomination of Brett M. Kavanaugh of Maryland to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
And Brett Kavanaugh will be sworn in privately tonight as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News, the White House.
So it was about whether or not the Senate was going to be intimidated. You had all those people shouting in the gallery. You had senators being chased throughout the week through the Capitol building, through their offices, to their offices. You had them being followed. You had people showing up at their homes. You had all that, and the Senate, largely along party lines, held the line against the intimidation. This was about the Senate. But let's remember what the opposition was also about. The opposition to Judge Brett M. Kavanaugh to become an associate member of the Supreme Court was and will always be abortion. That's all it's ever going to be. The whole thing about Me Too was a thin disguise to talk about abortion because the charge was false. Going back to what it was about the Senate, the question was, would they uphold the will of the electorate? Remember, Donald Trump campaigned openly telling you the type of Supreme Court justices he would nominate. Therefore, the Supreme Court appointees and the person who would be doing the appointing, that was a matter that was on the ballot, and the American electorate chose Donald Trump to make those choices. If you don't like those choices, well, that's too bad, because the American electorate, knowing that he had a list, knowing who was on that list, although Brett Kavanaugh himself, I don't believe, was on the original list prior to the election. But Donald Trump has always had a list. He's not in the back cooking up new things. He's here it is. And the will of the electorate was to have Donald Trump do just what he did, name people to the Supreme Court who were more conservative. And the Senate said the will of the American people will stand. Now, in the end, our good friends on the left, and I use that term good friends in air quotes and very loosely, they have a major problem. They used their best Alinskyite tactics to try to move this away from a Republic decision, not a Republican as in party, but a decision by the American Republic to have Donald Trump nominate people to the Supreme Court and have the Senate simply provide advice and consent on that. They did everything they could to remove the Constitution from this and say, look at women, look at how they're going to be affected. Well, guess what? And I don't say this to be cruel or in any way. Who cares how women are affected? Women are not the only people in America. And what women, at least women on the left, are willing to do, they are willing to totally trash an innocent man simply for their political agenda. To trash him, to trash his wife, to trash his 2 young daughters, they don't care. As long as they can have their political agenda. Understand that progressives that have taken over the Democrat Party, and therefore, by extension, the Democrat Party, are no longer interested in constitutional rule. Their only appeals are to emotion. Their only appeals are to the extreme pressure that they can bring to people apart from debate. There's no debate when you have people chanting. You can't debate with a chant. You can't debate with people who are lined up in D.C. repeating word for word, verbatim, the instructions that are being told to them by paid operatives. You can't debate with mind control. They don't want that same type of America that the founders had hoped they would be putting together, and that the majority of Americans still would like there to be. And that America is, I have my thoughts, you have your thoughts. We don't have to have the same thoughts, but we do agree that we will be governed by the same laws. And those laws are meant to allow us with our different thinking to exist and to coexist peacefully. And not just peacefully, fruitfully, profitably, in a thriving manner, where my family is taken care of by my efforts and your family is taken care of by your efforts. We don't have to agree. We may do business together. We may choose not to do business together. But here in America, as we pursue our own goals within the construct of the common laws of the United States, we can live at peace with one another, caring for the people who are most dear to us. That's all this is about. It's all it's ever been about. And now the Democrats are confronted with their worst nightmare, a Supreme Court that cannot be counted on to reliably line up with their ideological agenda. Sucks to be them. And November approaches, which people are taking in different ways, but it's for a different segment. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, talkamericaradio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. So, I was trying to figure out what next to talk about, and then, as usual, I was reminded.
Stay focused. Talk about things that matter to people. It's the economy, stupid.
Yes, the economy. So for those who have been very caught up, and I do mean very caught up, in all of the Supreme Court nomination and confirmation process and all the salacious and tabloid drama associated with that, well, maybe they weren't thinking about the economy. For those who are waiting for another opportunity to talk about the FISA warrant or the misapplication, misuse of the FISA warranting process, which I do believe is very important. Maybe they weren't thinking about the economy. I know the people who were concerned about the Mueller witch hunt were really not thinking much about the economy at all. But we do have a U.S. economy. And this past week, we did have a jobs report coming out for the month of September. Now, Fox Business News reported on this on Friday, the 5th, and they did so in this manner, and this kind of goes a little bit fast, so be warned that this is going to move rather quickly.
Edward Lawrence is at the Labor Department right now with the numbers. Edward, over to you.
And at the moment, I can tell you 134,000 jobs were created in this economy, 121,000 in the private sector, 13,000 in the government sector. The unemployment rate down to 3.7%. That's the lowest in 49 years. 1969, December is the last time it was that low. July revisions have been revised up to 165,000 jobs. August up to 270,000 jobs. That's a net revision gain of 87,000 jobs. The U6, 7.5%. The long-term unemployment, little changed at 1.4 million. Now, average hourly wages rose 0.8% to 27.24. That it means for the past 12 months, it's been a rise of 2.8%. Labor force participation rate unchanged at 62.7. Unchanged also the average hourly work week, 34.5 hours. The non-supervisory average wages up to 22.8%. White unemployment down to a 49-year low at 3.3%. Black unemployment also dropped to 6% from 6.3%. Hispanic unemployment down to 4.7%. Asian unemployment ticked up a little bit to 3.5%. Healthcare, big gains, 26,000 jobs in healthcare. Manufacturing climbed up 18,000 jobs. The largest gain in durable goods, that's 17,000 jobs there. Mining saw 6,000 jobs increase, and retail had a little change. Now, there was an asterisk to this that Hurricane Florence may have impacted the numbers. They do say that they don't know how much it has impacted, but again, the hurricane could have impacted. Construction trends up 23,000 jobs in construction. Over the year, 315,000 jobs added. So the big number here, 134,000 jobs created in the month of September. The unemployment rate down to 3.7%. Maria?
All right, Edward, thank you so much.
That was a lot of information gone through in a big hurry. The takeaways, 134,000 jobs added in the month of September. May have been affected by the hurricane, may not have been. A 49-year low in unemployment. Black unemployment down to 6%. Hispanic unemployment down to 4.7%. Wages up because people kept making the statement that Donald Trump was, quote-unquote, creating jobs. Presidents don't create jobs. But jobs were being created in the Trump economy, and people weren't getting any money. Well, year over year, you have an almost 3% increase in wages. And the work week is unchanged at 34 and a half hours a week. What does that tell me? More jobs, more money, and people are not working a longer average week. Is there something bad about this, by the way? I don't think so. Now, from another source, actually, the Morning Joe program on MSNBC, they gave a little bit different take, as you might imagine. But there's still some interesting information, and what they emphasize in here is what I really found interesting.
Breaking economic news with the release of the September jobs report. Let's go to CNBC's Dominic Chu. Dom, how many jobs were added last month?
Good morning, Mika. What we do have is right now a report from the Labor Department saying that 134,000 jobs were created in America for the month of September. That came in below estimates for 180,000. I'll take you through some of the headline numbers here. The unemployment rate did fall to 3.7%. It was 3.9% before, and by the way, that would mark the lowest unemployment rate since December of 1969. A lot of attention also being paid to what people make. Average hourly earnings up by 2.8% over the same time last year. That was in line with expectations. The average work week for Americans stood at 34.5 hours. That's unchanged. A couple of the other things to highlight: participation stayed steady, 62.7%. Also, the unemployment, the real unemployment rate, is 7.5%. That was slightly higher. Highlights include professional and business services adding 54,000 jobs, healthcare 26,000 jobs added, and of course transportation and warehousing 24,000 jobs added there as well. Leisure and hospitality, one of the biggest. Yes.
Yeah, let me ask you really quickly. So we come in under the 180,000 expected. We've always heard you need to usually pick up 200,000 a month to maintain pace. You said job participation stayed steady, historically low at 62%. It's been that now for 3, 4, 5 years. Why did the rate drop from 3.9 to 3.7%? Despite the fact that we actually came in below expectations?
So we came in below expectations, but one of the reasons why is because people are actually still working, and this was not because people dropped out of the workforce. What we did see was a fairly significant rise in the revisions to what happened in August and July. In fact, in August, the old number was 201,000 jobs. It turns out it was revised up to 270,000 jobs for the month of August. Wow. And in July, it went from 147,000 jobs reported previously up to 165,000 jobs. So what it does do is we do kind of like the math here. It keeps the 3-month average right around there at just around that 190,000 month for 3 months and around 201,000 jobs on average created over the last 12 months, Joe.
So it's not just the number that's being reported for this month. They do go back, and this happens all the time. They go back and revise numbers that they had previously reported based on new information they received. Long story short, Donald Trump's economy, his policies, which are primarily lower taxes and lower regulation of Americans who are trying to make things happen, is resulting in more opportunity, more employment, and more money. What else can you say? And I'm sorry, wages are up 2.8% from last year. Is that bad? It's so the idea that, well, we're creating these low jobs. The jobs we're creating now, for everyone who wants to give Obama credit, the jobs we're creating now are worth more to those working them than the jobs that were being created while he was president. So if Donald Trump is creating minimum wage jobs and this, that, and the other, then what in the heck was Barack Obama creating? And for those who keep missing it, let me explain for the umpteenth time. Less than 1.2% of workers earn at or below the minimum wage. Everybody else is beyond it. It's a non-issue. It is. And to be honest with you, it always has been a non-issue. One thing that is interesting, though, you may have heard that Amazon is giving everybody $15 an hour minimum wage, but at the same time they're getting rid of bonuses for their higher performing. You know what? You can't raise the minimum wage and still pay higher performing income workers. Amazon just proved it. Some of us already knew that. When you put in a minimum wage, you also put in a maximum wage. You put in that floor, you also put in a ceiling. And the people who are having a ceiling put over them deserve that less than those who are having a floor put under them. Why are you throttling somebody's wages? If I were someone in that position, I'd be getting my resume tuned up to be ready to go to someplace else that's not going to basically take the money I earn and give it to somebody else just because. That's just me. Now, for those who continue, and they will continue, particularly Democrats in D.C., to talk down the Trump economy and the American economy and say it's not everything that you need it to be, and if you give us an opportunity, we'll fix it by raising taxes and whatever, and restoring the regulations, that actually those things going away and changing is why the economy is where it is. We'll put those things back in place so you can really see what the economy is supposed to look like. We did see that for 8 years, didn't even touch 3% growth, averaged less than 2% growth for 8 years. We know what that looks like. But the Royal Bank of Canada recently, back on the 28th of September, put out a forecast for the U.S. economy. So this is not Republicans in D.C., not Democrats in D.C., not conservatives or liberals anywhere in this country. This is the Royal Bank of Canada giving their impression of what they believe is going to happen with the U.S. economy. Here's how that sounded.
We think the U.S. consumer is one of the bright spots in the U.S. economy. And don't get me wrong, it's broadly been a strong performance, and so it's not as though the consumer is the only place of strength, but there is some notable potential there. And it does reflect on the fact that the labor market there is strong, so plenty of people getting jobs, of course, expanding their ability to consume. Wage growth looking fairly good. It's picked up to some extent. That's a topic for another day, but nevertheless helpful, more than it was. Wealth effects are positive, meaning that people are getting richer from their stock investments and their homes, and that tends to translate in part into more spending. And people are feeling very confident, the highest levels of confidence in years, if not decades, depending on the measure. And so it adds up to a pretty favorable consumer picture. Certainly you can say interest rates are rising, so that maybe is a crimp on this outlook. Protectionism is something that hits consumer prices, and so there are a few challenges in there, but we think the good outweighs the bad. And there's an interesting twist that isn't normally relevant, which is recently the U.S. Statistical Agency revised its estimate of the personal savings rate. And previously we'd been led to believe the U.S. consumer was saving only 3.5% of their income. The Statistical Agency has said, whoops, it's actually 7%. So it's double what we had previously thought. We had thought it was a downward trend. It's actually been stable for the last few years. And really what that means is there's more potential spending out there. You could grow spending faster than income for a while without running out of money, essentially. And so, again, we think the consumer looks pretty good at this juncture, even with the high rates and the protectionism.
So did you hear that from someone beyond the U.S. borders? Okay, the job market is good. Earnings are up. Confidence in the economy is up. The savings rate is double what we had been told. So there's even more potential spending because there's more money sitting out there that's still on the sidelines. It's not in the... So what's bad about this again? The answer is nothing. The answer is nothing. And the wind beneath the Republican Party's wings, which is also the millstone around the Democrat Party's donkey mascot, its neck, is the performance of the American people within the American economy. Because the economy is just people trying to make a living. And they're doing very well under the policies of this administration. More people working than at any time in the last 49 years. Wages going up. Confidence measures that are at decades highs. Saving money. 7% savings rate. Think about that. All this bodes well for whoever is responsible for what policies are on the U.S. government that impact the economy. This is the kryptonite for the so-called blue wave. Because the Democrats have no plan for the economy except to remove what has worked, restore what was failing, and then tell you that all is well. Hopefully the American people won't go for that okie doke. Hopefully they won't. But the truth of the matter is, with the press we have and the pollsters that we have, always feeding negative information regarding the American people and those who lean right of center, you'll never know until the day after an election. But the truth is out there that the Trump economy is gangbusters. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the first hour. Again, while the American economy is booming and while we spent most of the last 90 or so days agonizing over Brett Kavanaugh and fantastic, fascinating stories that could not be proven about what type of person he had been 30 years ago, ignoring, of course, his 12 years of service on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, but that never matters to women of the left. What have you done that is most against me at any point in your life? And that is how we will judge all of your life, even if you didn't do it. Anyway, that's not the point of this segment. While we were looking at all that stuff and while the economy is going on, the Koreas are inching closer and closer to unification. Now, I know the big deal for the United States is simply denuclearization, but that's a different thing. That's what the U.S. would want, and of course, most of the world would want the same thing. If we can get nuclear weapons out of North Korea, that's a positive thing. But I dare say something that is maybe, not definitely, but maybe of greater cultural value to the Korean people, who are not South and North. They are one Korean people, separated politically and militarily. Might be that unification. And despite what people think, we're making moves in that direction. As a matter of fact, CBS reported on Sunday, October 7th, about another step being taken by North Korea.
We'd like to go now to Seoul, South Korea, and CBS News correspondent Errol Barnett, who's covering Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's trip to the region. Errol?
John, America's top diplomat received quite a warm welcome when he landed in Pyongyang today, which is in stark contrast to when he was effectively stood up by Chairman Kim Jong-un back in July. This time around, the American and North Korean delegations, led by Secretary Pompeo and Chairman Kim, met for 2 hours, followed by a formal lunch. The two sides are getting closer, we are told, to figuring out where and when President Trump will hold a second summit with Kim. The U.S. wants Pyongyang to irreversibly denuclearize in a way that can be verified, and it wants it done by 2021, the end of President Trump's first term, while North Korea wants UN sanctions lifted and the U.S. to declare an end to the Korean War, neither of which is likely in the short term. Pompeo is here in Seoul tonight to reassure South Korean Prime Minister Moon Jae-in talks are moving in the right direction.
President Trump has said many steps along the way, and we took one of them today with another step forward. So this is, I think, a good outcome for all of us.
Secretary Pompeo also tells President Moon that President Trump will meet Chairman Kim at the earliest possible date. Now, before he returns to Washington, Pompeo wraps up this tour through East Asia in Beijing. There he will meet with President Xi Jinping and encourage him to fully enforce sanctions against North Korea, while also attempting to smooth over tensions stemming from the ongoing trade war with the U.S.
Errol Barnett for us in Seoul, South Korea. Thanks, Errol.
So we have talks of a second summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. Wow. That's interesting. And, of course, that's massive progress from what was alluded to in that report back in July when, well, Secretary of State Pompeo was kind of put on the back burner by Chairman Kim over agricultural issues, so to speak.
Thing one tonight, in the week since Donald Trump returned from his summit with Kim Jong-un and declared mission accomplished, there are reports that North Koreans have no intention of denuclearizing, and continuing talks between the two governments have, surprise, not gone so smoothly. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just finished a visit to North Korea over the weekend, which one source told CNN went as badly as it could have gone, and the North Koreans were just messing around. And while they certainly seemed to be messing with Pompeo at times, like after a meeting on Saturday morning when top official Kim Yong-chul asked the secretary, quote, "Did you sleep well last night?" Pompeo responding, I did. Thank you for the accommodation." And Kim replying, "But we did have very serious discussions on very important matters yesterday, so thinking about those discussions, you might not have slept well last night." Not sure what that is all about, but as Pompeo left the country, he, upbeat, characterized the meetings as productive, and then just hours later, the North Koreans accused the Americans of pushing a, quote, gangster-like demand for denuclearization. Perhaps this would have gone better if Pompeo had met with Kim Jong-un himself. The North Korean leader was busy, very busy, with super important, top-secret potato work. That's thing two. When Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went to North Korea last week to continue high-level talks, some people expected he would meet with Kim Jong-un like he did on his last visit in April. The secretary was snubbed, and Kim was nowhere to be seen, which we now know may have been because he had an important meeting with some potatoes. Yes, potatoes. Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. Kim had been abnormally absent from state media headlines for the past week, including the days Pompeo was in the country. But today, the official news agency filled in the blanks, reporting that Kim had been in a remote northern county where he visited the Jong-hun potato farm and instructed staff to, quote, introduce various species, good to taste, and ensure the quality of processed potato foods in production. When it came to Pompeo, Kim chose potato. I'm sure this will all work out.
And apparently it will work out, because even being snubbed by the chairman while you were visiting North Korea is a heck of a big step forward from having the President of the United States call Kim Jong-un Rocket Man and saying that the United States would have no choice if he did not stop his nuclear posturing. We'd have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Calling the man out of his name, belittling him, and saying that, you know what, you don't have a chance. There was the fire and fury comment, unleashing something, fire and fury, unlike anything the world had ever seen or ever would see. And you go from there to simply being snubbed by a guy who wanted to go look at potatoes. I'd say that was progress. That's what happened back in July. And now they're sitting down to lunch and they're having great discussions and moving things along, another step forward in the process. Wow. And back in August, there was a meeting of North Korean and South Korean families, actually family reunions, people who have been separated for decades by the Korean War. CBS News reported on this. It was on the 21st of August. They filed their report on this family reunion for Koreans.
Dozens of South Koreans are in North Korea this week, reuniting with family members they've been separated from since the Korean War. The emotional and time-limited reunion is being held at a mountain resort north of the border between the two countries. Ben Tracy joins us from the South Korean capital, Seoul, with more on this rare and happy event. Ben, good morning.
Good morning. It has now been 3 years since the last round of the reunions of separated families took place, and time is really running out for a lot of Koreans who are now in their 80s and their 90s. So this small group is now meeting their long-lost relatives for the first time in decades, but sadly they also know it will be the last time they meet.
This is what it looks like when a 92-year-old woman gets to hug her son for the first time in 68 years. He is now 71, and like everyone in this room, they were separated during the bloody Korean War, which split the peninsula in two in 1953. This brother and sister could not contain their emotion as they embraced for the first time in decades. This part in his face just looked like our father, said this North Korean woman. This week of reunions was one of the main agreements made by South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at their April summit. It's been a moment of relative stability on the Korean peninsula, even though there are no signs that North Korea has actually decided to abandon its nuclear weapons program. But for the people in this room, none of that matters. They are here to make up for lost time, learning how their relatives have spent their lives just a few hundred miles away. This 82-year-old from South Korea was reunited with her two sisters. I expected my sisters to be dead, but they are alive and well, she said. Many brought photographs of their extended families, even if it was sometimes difficult to recognize each other. Even if he's gotten old and has wrinkles on his face, there is still some of him left in his appearance, said Kim Young-sung after reuniting with his North Korean brother.
Now, there are thousands of other Koreans who have not been picked to participate in one of these reunions. Here in the South, they're actually chosen by a lottery, but in North Korea, it's believed that they're actually chosen for their loyalty to the authoritarian regime there. John?
Ben Tracy in Seoul, thanks. The images of them holding hands after such separation and not wanting to let go again.
A mother seeing her baby, even though he's 70-something years old.
The last time
that will always be your baby.
I know. I saw you crying.
I know, right?
Those tears come. But I remind you how important your family is.
Yeah, what we take for granted here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Donald Trump is working to bring to the Korean Peninsula something that we take advantage of here, family. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is about in Korea. There is a nation of people. We talk about the divide in this country. You want to talk about a political divide, go to North Korea. And you have people divided by the 38th parallel, where they're not allowed to travel back and forth to see family members on the other side. And you see the outpouring of emotion when they are allowed, even though decades have passed. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But that unification, the family reunion is one thing, but the unification of the countries is another. And lately, Kim Jong-un has been hinting at and even pushing unification of the two Koreas in state-sponsored messages in his country.
North Korea is rolling out its latest propaganda fixation, getting back together with the South. Pyongyang's been pushing the idea to its people before the South's leader visits on Tuesday. Just days before the summit, Kim Jong-un spoke of tearing down a wall of conflict and opening a grand path for unification, according to state media. But what the North has in store may not be uniting as equals, says Reuters' So Young-kim in Seoul.
Well, South Korea says that North Korea's teaching on unification historically focused on integration based on North Korean ideologies and a revolution of the South.
Experts say that's an unlikely outcome, but it's playing well to North Koreans. One soldier who performed in Kim's military parade last week told Reuters how he would describe life in the North to his southern neighbors.
I will spread the word on how wonderful it is to be in our dear Marshal Kim Jong-un's arms.
Residents in the capital say it's only a matter of time before they're reunited with the South, albeit while under the watchful eye of government minders who followed the reporters. The state's message, though, is less about being a good neighbour and more about padding out its wallet.
Experts say unification is a powerful slogan that gives justification for North Korea to urge South Korea to move forward bilateral relations against external forces, for example, the United States. Continuing to emphasize the unity among the Korean people could be a reflection of Kim Jong-un wanting South Korea to be less hindered by its U.S. alliance or international sanctions.
While the idea is gaining traction across the North, it's a topic that's hardly discussed in the South. Estimates put the North's per capita gross national income as less than 5% that of South Korea, and the cost of bringing the two sides together could be up to $5 trillion, with the tab likely being picked up by Seoul. For the South, a push towards peaceful coexistence is far more appetizing than reuniting.
Well, not surprising when you look at it from an economic perspective. There's a cost for bringing these things back together, the economic systems and infrastructure systems. There's a cost, and that would have to be borne by those who have the money, which is not North Korea. And as a result, those who aren't, as affected aren't necessarily as crazy about it. But at the end of the day, they're still family. We'll see what they do. But you might remember, back at the beginning of this presidential term, the outgoing president, Obama, told the incoming President Trump that North Korea would be his most urgent problem. Why is it that nobody sees North Korea as an urgent problem right now? Could it be because Trump actually dealt with it? Because Obama did not. Bush did not. Clinton did not. Bush 41 did not. Reagan did not. Carter did not. Ford did not. And Nixon got us on this path in the first place. Donald Trump is doing what can be done to fix North Korea. Getting them back together is a big step, and getting nuclear weapons out of the equation. That ought to work out pretty well, to be honest with you. Work out for them, work out for the rest of the world, and an untroubled Korean peninsula is actually something that, it helps out the drive to make America great again, particularly if American leadership had anything to do with them coming to terms. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and then we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
If there is no Republican red wave in the midterm elections, congressional Republicans have no one but themselves to blame. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, the Republicans in Congress are playing a game of political roulette. Many of them ran for office promising to work with President Trump to build that much-needed wall on our southern border. Illegal border crossers are wreaking havoc in our republic, committing murders, rapes, and other assorted atrocities. Financially, illegal border crossers cost American taxpayers $150 billion annually. A solid border wall would cost a one-time fee of $25 billion, a small price to pay for defending our borders and preserving our national sovereignty. Yet far too many gutless wonder Republicans and their disgustingly feckless, lame-duck obstructionist leader Paul Ryan have done the bidding of the leftist Democrats, who openly favor open borders over border security and preserving our national sovereignty. Hopefully, Republicans will care enough to support Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona's bill that financially penalizes countries whose citizens stream into our republic illegally. I'm Ron Edwards. Don't miss the Ron Edwards Experience Fridays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on AmericaMatters.us, SHR Media, and Sunday midnights on Talk America Radio.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy here with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. I want to ask a question, and it's really simple. Do primarily women, leftist women, do the left, and particularly the women of the left, really understand that they lost? And I say that because of the coverage of the protests of the vote for Kavanaugh that you saw over the weekend. For example, here's how NBC covered some of the proceedings during the vote.
Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery.
Mr. Manchin.
The clerk will suspend. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery.
Now, despite all that histrionics, order was restored, despite the need to call for it several times, and Brett M. Kavanaugh was confirmed as the latest and now 9th Supreme Court Justice. An associate justice, but he is now on the Supreme Court. I don't know what that young lady or those people in the gallery actually thought they were going to accomplish, because the truth of the matter is they had already lost on Friday. There was not much chance, although there was a possibility, there was little chance that what you saw on Friday was not going to be replicated on Saturday, and it in effect was. The vote to confirm happened both times, on Friday and on Saturday. They lost. They didn't stop fighting, but they never recognized they lost. Here is the issue. This has been going on for most of my lifetime. I'm a child of the 1960s. So I was there. I was around when people were occupying college campuses and taking over buildings, and others were blowing up buildings, and all of it ostensibly about the Vietnam War, when it really wasn't about the Vietnam War. It was basically about they didn't like the country. That's really all it came out to be. They did not like the country. They liked the advantages of being in the country. They did not like what it took or what it takes to actually have and to maintain a country like the United States. And they wanted to see it all come apart. But there was a group identified by Richard M. Nixon as the silent majority who looked at all of their protests, heard all of their concerns, took a nice gander at the world and the issues therein, and told the children, hush, and they elected Richard Nixon. That was in 68 and in 72. Nixon, of course, went sideways. Ford came in and did nothing of note. And Jimmy Carter was the most incompetent man outside of, well, you know what, Jimmy Carter was an incompetent man. He was not a worse president than Barack Obama. Barack Obama was not incompetent. He was trying to take the nation down, and he did a good job. He just didn't complete the job. But from there, with the incompetence of Jimmy Carter, that brought the silent majority back together to form the Reagan Revolution. And he picked up people on both sides of the aisle, just like Richard Nixon did, and carried them into a different political reality where America was actually doing well. Did very, very well, despite all the revisionism of the left. The truth of the matter is, when Ronald Reagan came into office, you had double-digit inflation, double-digit federal interest rates, and double-digit employment. All of that was cured within one presidential term, and it launched the greatest peacetime expansion of the U.S. economy at that time. You can't get away from that, although they lie about it often. And then, of course, you had George H.W. Bush, who said, "Read my lips," and then he lied about what his lips had said. And from there you got to Bill Clinton, who raped his way through a whole bunch of things. And if it hadn't been for Newt Gingrich, people would remember Bill Clinton very differently. I can tell you that now. The surplus and everything else, that was Newt Gingrich and a GOP Congress and Senate. But after that, after 8 years of Clinton, and seeing what a GOP Congress and Senate could do, the Reagan Revolution came back. The silent majority that had become the Reagan Revolution came back again for a stint as the Bush Brigade. And Bush gave them one good term, and then he fell apart. He literally fell apart. Particularly after 2006. He just I don't know, just went haywire. And that brought in 8 years of Barack Obama, which is chaotic. But one man came back speaking things that were American in nature, and that was Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not anybody's real conservative. Donald Trump is not anybody's strong Republican. Donald Trump simply thinks, acts, and speaks like an American. And the silent majority, which had become the Reagan Revolution, would become the Bush Brigade, came together with him. Because you have to remember, that group, the silent majority, the Reagan Revolution, the Bush Brigade, and now the Trump deplorables, they are undefeated. They don't lose. And the left, particularly the progressive women on the left, really don't understand that they are getting beaten. I'll give you one great example. You heard that first bit. Here's MSNBC and Joy Reid's reaction to the vote confirming Brett Kavanaugh.
On this vote, the ayes are 50, the nays are 48. The nomination of Brett M. Kavanaugh of Maryland to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
Mr. Majority Leader.
I ask consent the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
You know, when you listen to the Vice President there as President of the Senate, you often notice there's a certain pause before he speaks. That's because he's being prompted. Nothing wrong with that. The parliamentarians do that for a living. They're whispering from off camera there to the one in the chair, telling them what to say next. In fact, it's literal. It's word for word what they're supposed to say. Anyway, joining right now is Joy Reid, of course, from AM Joy, Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation, and Elise Jordan, MSNBC political analyst. So in that order, let's go to the Reverend first. We don't have the Reverend yet. Let's go to Joy again. Joy, you're thinking about this. I know you have passions on this subject, and they are appropriately placed. So who's going to win the, as they say in baseball, the bounce of the ball? Because I think both sides are claiming new energy as a result of this whole episode.
Well, talking with Republican strategist friends of mine, they essentially said that the fight over Kavanaugh energized the Republican base, particularly white men and college-educated white women who saw in Kavanaugh their son, who's in a fraternity, et cetera, and were energized for the Republicans. It's not sure that can last the next 30 days, but the anger, the rage, the just the pure, unadulterated anger and rage of women, of non-Republican women, I think is something that can carry over. And I was struck that Mitch McConnell said, we all know the events of recent weeks have strained the Senate's comity and fanned the flames of partisan discord. Well, my God, who's done that more than Mitch McConnell? Mitch McConnell broke the Senate and then urged people to come back from the darkness. He brought the darkness. Mitch McConnell has decided that the Senate is the place where Republicans have absolute power, where Democrats have none, where they rule over women and people of color on behalf of Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell's own aims. This man brought the darkness. He succeeded in bringing the darkness, and now he claims he's putting a man of the highest character and superlative qualifications on the court. The majority of Americans disagree with that. They feel that Kavanaugh has been imposed, forced on the majority of Americans by a minority who wants to rule from the past. Mitch McConnell wants to rule from decades ago, that he is imposing order as he sees it on the majority of Americans. I have a feeling that the outrage over that will last longer than the sugar high of having gotten their man.
Well, Joy Reid is one of the most racist individuals in broadcast journalism. Period. And she's wrong. This is not a sugar high. The same women who were upset with the treatment of Judge Kavanaugh are part of the silent majority, are part of the Reagan Revolution, are part of the Bush Brigade, are part of the Trump deplorables. It's all the same group. This is the group of undefeated Americans who believe that people should be treated in accordance with the rule of law, who do not believe that just because you have an emotional allegation that everything else should stop and go along with that. She does not know what she's talking about. This is not a sugar high. This is a deep-seated resolve. You didn't see rioting in the streets when Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed. At least one thing I read on social media, for what it's worth, indicated that they interrupted a game on Saturday, probably a college football game or a baseball game, to announce that Kavanaugh had been confirmed, and the people in the bar cheered. Well, that's just old, white, uneducated guys. That's Trump's base. You think that that's all it is? That is the mistake of the left all the time. They think that their localized energy, by getting their people out to show up on Capitol Hill, they think that means something. They think that if we have enough, and if you saw any of the videos of the people who were chanting in response to the paid operatives who were directing them where to go on Capitol Hill and who to protest, helping them to chase down senators and the like, if you think that they represent a majority in America, you're fooling yourself. They don't. And their problem comes down to this, because women need to recognize, leftist women need to recognize they lost. And here is a woman telling them exactly what that loss is, and that would be the senator from Maine, Susan Collins. I'm not a fan, but she is at least telling the truth.
Do you still think it is possible that he did it? You just don't have the proof to back that up?
I do not believe that Brett Kavanaugh was her assailant. So I do believe that she was assaulted. I don't know by whom, and I'm not certain when, but I do not believe that he was the assailant.
And so people watching you, hearing you say that, you understand that they'll think that you're saying you don't believe her, that she, I know you say that she believes that he was, but maybe she was wrong. But if she said that under oath and he said that under oath, you made a decision that he said is more valid than what she said.
In this country, we have a presumption of innocence. And as a matter of fairness, what I decided to use as a standard was the question of, is it more likely than not that Brett Kavanaugh assaulted Christine Ford? And there was no corroborating evidence that he did so. Each of the people that Professor Ford said was present that night have testified under oath, both to the committee through the declarations that they submitted and to the FBI now, that they have no memory of this happening. And that includes Dr. Ford's best friend.
And that includes Dr. Ford's best friend, who said these things. 1, I believe Christine. 2, I don't know what party she's talking about. 3, I don't know Brett Kavanaugh. I've never met Brett Kavanaugh. 4, I've never been at any party or gathering where Brett Kavanaugh was present with or without Christine Ford. She's lying. Well, maybe she was assaulted. I don't believe she was assaulted. There is no statute of limitations on sexual assault in Maryland. If this happened, bring forth the same stuff you took to the Washington Post and take it to the law enforcement authorities and do an investigation. Tell them the same thing that you've told the press and see if they find anyone to hold criminally accountable. The answer is they will not, because your story is whack. How whack is it? I'll let the president tell you.
How did you get home? I don't remember. How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember. How many years ago was it? I don't know. I don't know. What neighborhood was it in? I don't know. Where's the house? I don't know. Upstairs, downstairs, where was it? I don't know. But I had one beer. That's the only thing I remember. And a man's life is in tatters. A man's life is shattered. We had another woman just reported by a sleazebag lawyer named Aviate. Sleazebag. It turned out even NBC, who's as bad as they get, even NBC couldn't shield her with that interview. Did you see that interview? This woman had no clue what was going on.
When the President of the United States can speak that way about your story, to raucous applause and cheers, we're not talking about, and remember, this is a rally at which 5-digit to the left side of the decimal point number of people showed up. They don't believe you. They don't believe Joy Reid. They don't believe Christine Ford. They don't believe Debbie Ramirez. They don't believe Julianne Swetnick. They do not believe them. They do believe the evidence, and the problem with that was no evidence came forward, and all the information that did come forward said the same thing. Lady, you got the wrong guy if this happened at all. If you think that that's not a repudiation of the left, and Joy Reid does not think so, you'll be surprised in 3 or 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks. You will be. And then you will be doing the same thing on November 6th of 2018 that you were doing on November 8th of 2016. And that is wondering how you got everything so wrong. You've lost, and you just don't know it. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. So, again, I got to ask the question, I'm going to keep asking, do the people who are losing this war, even though they are taking up all the time on the nightly news, they dominate the coverage, they make the most interesting of interviews, but they've lost? Because the silent majority in America always wins. And going out there and trying to bang on the door of the Supreme Court and pry it open with your fingers is not what the American people do. The American people built the building. They're not trying to tear it down. They will change its occupants, but they will not try to tear the building down. You really don't get it. So let's talk about Americans resisting the Trump resistance. There are some things that are essential to you being able to do that well. The first thing you have to recognize is the resistance to Trump is not organic. It's not like, oh, we just dislike Trump. No, there's not. It's not. Because Americans do not hate politicians who do well simply because they have personality. They can separate job performance from personality. If it weren't the case, then how do you explain Bill Clinton? If it weren't the case, how do you explain Barack Obama? Bill Clinton is a serial rapist and was one while he was the White House inhabitant. People separated that from what they perceived to be his job performance, which was actually Newt Gingrich's job performance, because the American economy did well and the ship of state was not totally listing as it had been for the Democrat who preceded him, which would have been Jimmy Carter. They separated that out and said, they really weren't that much in favor of the impeachment. And once had they actually made the case for treason, which they had a case for treason against Bill Clinton, they did not pursue it. Had he been impeached for that, you probably would have gotten a number of more Americans, in favor of removing Bill Clinton. But if you're going to go after a guy for getting oral sex performed on him in the White House and penetrating someone young enough to be his daughter with a cigar, while the country's not doing bad otherwise, you know what? You're really not going to move the majority of the American people with that argument. Ken Starr should have been ashamed of himself for even bringing that out. That's what it was. But my point being, the resistance is not organic. Oh, Trump is a terrible American. Donald Trump is a great American. He's been a great American, a very successful American, a very patriotic American, a staunch American, someone who actually stands for America's principles. Despite the claims that are going on now, you've never seen Donald Trump do anything that was innately racist. I know the claims, the Central Park Five, he wasn't against them because they were black. Oh, there's the housing discrimination. Folks didn't pay their rent, and he didn't want to rent to folks who didn't pay. Well, you don't know what you know what? Go into New York. Go into the places where you have the large landlords who are renting buildings to low-income people and let them tell you who pays the rent and who does not on time, if ever. And then you're going to say, of course, that it's, well, you're discriminating because of color. No, I'm discriminating. Yeah, I'm discriminating because of color. There's no green coming in on the first of the month like it's supposed to. The fact that those who don't give me my green happen to be black is of no consequence to me. If all the people who paid me on time were black and all the folks who didn't pay me on time were white, I'd be discriminating against white folks. You don't get it because you don't want to. Donald Trump is not a racist. Never has been. This is basically, and the real thing about this is not even resistance to Trump. This is resistance to the American ethic by those who don't share it. Some of them are indeed citizens of America, but they're not American in their minds. Their mindset is something totally different. And it's been revealed, even the people who were demonstrating this week in D.C., some of them were paid operatives of George Soros through one or more of his different organizations. And please explain to me, do you really think that people around the country were so in love with Christine Blasey Ford and her interesting story that they came up with $1 million to give her on GoFundMe? You think that came from grassroots? Are you really that naive? George Soros has a lot of money. Who do you think paid for her attorneys? And you had to do something for the woman to get her to put herself out there. $1 million will make a whole lot of people say a whole lot of things, even though they're bald-faced lies. And of course, now that Kavanaugh has been confirmed, it's going to be a long time before you hear from Christine Blasey Ford again. Oh, they'll trot her out. They'll trot her name out during the election, but will you see her again? Remember what happened to Anita Hill? She disappeared. Name didn't disappear, but she disappeared. And then she came out of hiding recently, and when you did, you realize why they made her disappear. This is not organic. These are people who are against the country. These are not Americans who are looking for a different direction. These are people who do not like America and want America to be entirely different. As a result, why do you keep treating these people like Americans? Oh, our differences. No, they're not our differences. I don't have let me help you out with something. I don't believe Americans support abortion. I don't believe any civilized, moral, or ethical society can support the murder of children in the womb for any reason that suits an irresponsible woman. I don't want to hear well, what about the man? Because in America, the way you have it set up, no woman gets or remains pregnant except by her will. None. So you know what? You got the morning after pill. You have all kinds of contraception. You have clinics all over this country where they give these things out for free. Not Planned Parenthood clinics either. Federal health clinics where you can get all the contraception you want at no cost to you. So if you get pregnant, whose fault is that? You have to stop treating people who do not have American ideals like Americans. Americans are not killers. They are not murderers. They are not inherently unfair people. That does not make them perfect. That does not make them saints. It means they are simply not unfair people. An unfair people would not have gotten rid of Jim Crow. An unfair people would not have gone to war to end chattel slavery. Americans are not unfair. Stop treating these people who want to hold you accountable for battles that have already been won, as though they're up again and you are perpetrating something that hasn't even been seen in the country for anywhere from 50 to 150 years. Stop treating these people like they are your fellow citizens. They are not. They are not. If you're sitting up in D.C. pounding on the door, yelling at cops, calling them pigs, telling veterans that they don't belong in the nation's capital, you are not an American. Just because you happen to have citizenship, you do not believe in the 5 self-evident truths of the Declaration of Independence. And most of you don't know what they are. You don't think that's a problem? It's a huge problem. You want to know why it's so hard to fight people that are enemies of the Constitution? Because we have such a problem identifying them as such. And we need to meet their emotional aggression with the aggression of law and order. Meet their emotional aggression with the dispassionate aggression of law and order. What does that mean? When you accuse somebody of a crime, we're not going to get caught up in the emotion of how you felt about what you can or cannot demonstrate even occurred. We are going to look for the information that confirms or denies that it ever took place. And once we have that information, we don't need you that much anymore. We're going to go forward with that and determine whether or not the individual involved needs to be held accountable. You cannot have the type of society that America needs to be catering to anybody's emotions. I can't sit up here and deal with black and white and brown and male and female and Christian and Jewish and Muslim and Hindu and everything else and conservative and liberal. There are legitimate liberals in this country. There are no legitimate progressives in this country. Progressivism is not American. But there is no way to have the type of country that America was meant to be and to allow all these people to come together and live in any form of harmony by being concerned about anyone's emotional state. So, I repeat, meet their emotional aggression with the dispassionate aggression of law and order. The other thing, or another thing, is you should never, and I mean never, allow the resistance, the Trump resistance or any other type of American resistance on domestic soil, you should never allow them to legitimize their position with electoral success. And to be honest with you, it rarely, if ever, happens. Since 2009, it's been reported, but you know what? If the media harped on this point the way they harp on some other points that don't matter, we'd have a different America. The Democrats in 2009, after Barack Obama was elected and he walked in after his inauguration, there were 28 governors out of 50 who were Democrats. 60 of the 99 state legislative chambers in America were controlled by Democrats. Democrats had a 70-plus seat majority in the House. They had an 18-seat, and if you counted the independents, a 20-seat majority in the Senate, and they had the White House. That was 2009. That was less than a decade ago. And now they've gone from 28 governors to 16. 33 governors are GOP. They've gone from controlling 60 of the 99 to controlling 32. 67 of the 99 state legislative bodies in the United States are majority Republican. The Republicans hold the Senate. The Republicans hold the House. And the Republicans hold the White House. They have not been able to back up their rhetoric and their position with electoral success for nearly a decade. Don't think about letting them do it now, because it's not appropriate. It's not American. It's really not that difficult to understand. The first thing you need to do when you're facing the Trump resistance is recognize this is the same virulent ideology that was around in the 1960s, around in the 1970s, was beaten back somewhat in the 1980s, rose again because you had a man who was the height of immorality in the White House throughout the majority of the 1990s. You had a man who at least came across as being of character in 2000, so it was not as prevalent. And then it was turned loose starting in 2008. But the American people saw what it was. And from the moment Barack Obama was inaugurated with special elections and the like, they started getting rid of Democrats. More than 1,000 seats changed hands at the state and federal level from 2009 until the end of the Barack Obama presidency. Why? Because that is one way that Americans resist the resistance. Because again, it's not Trump resistance. It's resistance to the idea of America. The way they do it, in part, is to not let people who hate America hold political power. And guess what? We have an election coming up. So maybe you want to take stock of that and stop them again. Understand who you're fighting. They're not on your side. They just want to take what you have. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. I've heard there is an election coming. 31 days, 30 days, soon. Soon. As in next month, soon. And it is a midterm election. Tradition has it that in a midterm election that the party in power, the president, usually loses support in one or both houses of Congress. That's the way it has gone generally. And the Democrats are doing their best to tell everyone that there is a blue wave coming, that Republicans are going to be turned out in the street, that, but here's the problem with that. Based on what message? There is no messaging from the Democrats to indicate that they're going to do something better than the Republicans. And the Republicans, I'm not saying that they're responsible for it, but they are presiding, as it were, over a country that is operating better now than when Donald Trump took office in January of last year. The economy is better. Our foreign policy is better. Our trade policy is better. Our borders, our southern border at least, is more secure. We're actually looking at some of these things. Taxes are lower. The job market is vastly improved. The financial markets are doing better, and I'm not really want to put stock in that. The country is doing better. Is it perfect? No. But of the things that you could exploit, like perhaps deficit spending, you really believe the Democrats have a message on deficit spending? No, they really don't. But I went back and I was looking, because the blue wave thing, which is really just propaganda, there's going to be a blue wave because the Democrats say there's going to be a blue wave. There's not going to be a blue wave because the American people want to change. They voted for a change in November of 2016, and they have responded well to the change that they got. There's no indication from the American people that they are looking to change course. There is an indication from those who lost that election in 2016 that they should, because the folks who lost don't like the fact that they lost. That's their story. That's all they've got. The Wall Street Journal, which I used to think was an objective publication and organization, came out back in March with an analysis, as it were, that talked about the upcoming midterms, and even this was back in March, and they brought up some interesting points, most of which I can refute.
Wave elections against the White House.
Want to see a wave? This is what a wave feels like.
It could be a blue wave year.
This year's midterm elections are all about the wave. Democrats are certainly expected to pick up some seats in 2018. The sitting president's party has gained seats in both houses in just 2 midterms in the last 150 years. Does that mean the Dems will definitely take the House or the Senate? Not exactly. The Democrats may have the wave, but the Republicans have the wall, a substantial majority in the House and a strong economy. So which one will prevail? Consider 3 recent midterm waves. In 1994, when Republicans gained 54 House seats. In 2006, when Democrats won 31. And in 2010, when Republicans picked up 63. They tended to share 5 common themes: a low presidential approval rating, intensity in the opposition party, success in special elections, a lot of retirements in the majority party, and a weak economy. So let's look at 2018. President Trump has the lowest approval rating of any modern president at the end of their first year. So check. Intensity in the opposition party? Check. Big check. Special election success?
So we have shown the country the way that we can be unified.
Check. A lot of retirements? Check. 35 so far. But what about a weak economy? Well, no. Not only is the economy doing well despite the recent market turmoil, perhaps even more importantly, people believe the economy is doing well. And that doesn't help the Democratic wave. Even so, by most measures, it looks like Democrats will ride the wave to win back seats in Congress. But will they pick up enough to clear the Republican wall? To take back the House, Democrats need to pick up 24 new seats, in addition to holding on to the ones they already have. They could succeed. At least 6 GOP-held seats are expected to turn over. 18 are considered a toss-up, and 21 are considered competitive. The GOP wall may be stronger in the Senate. Democrats need to pick up at least 2 seats while defending 26, while Republicans only need to defend 8. The GOP has another thing to strengthen that wall: gerrymandering. Congressional redistricting in many key places favors Republican incumbents. Will that be enough to hold back the wave? Even if the Democrats fail to take back the House or Senate, a wave of victories is likely to wash out some of the Republican power in Washington.
That is interesting to me. The audio brought out 5 different points indicating or suggesting that the Democrats had cleared 4 of the 5 hurdles, and that the 5th one was not going to prevent them from picking up seats. Here's what they said: a low approval rating for the president. Let's bear something in mind. Donald Trump has a higher approval rating now than he did by the same pollsters who are low rating him at this time than he did when he was a candidate. Up until the day of the election, the polls and the pollsters were saying that Hillary Clinton was going to win in a landslide. Donald Trump's numbers were so terrible. So I don't know that his approval rating is that. How do you win if your approval rating is so bad? That doesn't make sense to me. And he did win, even though he was supposed to lose by a landslide. He won by a rather significant margin. So maybe his approval rating is not as low as you think. Maybe it's higher than you think. There's something to be thought of there. Let's talk about the next one, the intensity of the opposition. You'll notice they didn't give you anything but some crowd noise on that one. I thought that was, very, very interesting. But as far back as May, a CNN poll said that the Democrats' 2018 advantage was nearly gone. And that was on the generic congressional ballot. It kept tightening. Now, the Wall Street Journal report I played for you was from March. So the advantage they had in intensity and generic ballot, that's gone. Basically in May. And it gets better and better. Breitbart, with respect to the Kavanaugh effect, now that's coming up very recently. That's this month. GOP grassroots fundraising skyrockets amid Democrat smear campaign. The result of what the Democrat Party did with respect to the Kavanaugh nomination so incensed some people in the electorate that the GOP grassroots fundraising has taken off. That would suggest to me that the intensity of the opposition is going to be met by the intensity of the incumbents. So where's that advantage? I don't believe the approval rating advantage. I just don't believe it, because if it was what they said, he shouldn't even be president. I don't believe in the intensity of opposition. I don't think they have the advantage. I think they have the advantage of who gets the most attention, but I don't think they have the advantage in intensity. They talked about special election success, and they did a voiceover of Doug Jones and indicating that, yep, they're having success in special elections. There have been 11 special elections, one for Senate, that was in Alabama, and 10 for the House of Representatives. Those 11 special elections, 8 of 11 have been won by the Republican Party. Please explain to me how winning 3 out of 11 elections means that you have success. If we were playing baseball, you wouldn't even be hitting 300. As far as retirements in the majority party, okay, we got a lot of retirements. What does that supposedly mean? Does that mean that there aren't any capable people of the same party to replace them? I don't know that it means that. If that's what it meant, then you probably would expect that the special election results would have been different up to this point, but every election is different. And then there's the other thing that you're looking for big turnover in the House and or the Senate, and that's a weak economy. Well, we don't have a weak economy. So of the 5 that they identified, the Wall Street Journal said the presidential approval rating favored the Democrats. I don't believe it does. They said the intensity of voters or voter enthusiasm favored the Democrats. I'm not sure it does, particularly not after this weekend. Special election success, the Democrats haven't had it. The retirements in the major party, I got to give them that. There have been a lot of retirements. And a weak economy, there is no weak economy. The Wall Street Journal essentially gave the Democrats 4 of the 5 and said the only one that favored the GOP was a strong economy. I reckon it to be much different. I give the incumbents 4 out of 5. The one that I cannot argue against is that there have been a lot of retirements. But I don't think that the president is, I don't think Donald Trump is unpopular. I think he's unpopular with those who do reporting and those who take polls. I don't think that the Democrats are more intense about electing their people than the GOP is about keeping their people. And perhaps you've forgotten there's a big walk-away movement going on right now. Special election success is simply not there. That's just a blatant lie on the part of the Wall Street Journal. Here's what you need to understand. America is actually in the process of trying to make the little corny campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," a reality. They've embraced it. They like it. And they like it because what it seems to be doing for them and their families in their pocketbooks and elsewhere. And that matters to Americans. The rest of this stuff is politics they would rather not deal with. So we have about a month. Get yourself ready. And if you are someone who votes, be ready to go vote. If you're not someone who votes, consider voting. And for goodness sake, do not contribute your vote to a party that hates America, which would be the Democrats. Vote in favor of America so that we can continue to have the trend that we have right now, which is positive for all Americans. It just simply violates the ideological sensibilities of those who would rather live in Venezuela. And that's our show. God bless you. May God keep you, protect you and your families. And until next week, do take care.
Listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.